Australians need to wake the F up. Martin North, John Adams, In the Interest of the People. Hello, John.
Hello, sir.
Oh, nice calm title there.
To be honest, Martin, I am completely pissed off.
I guessed.
Yes. The thing is that I mean, look, I think it's now we've reached a point in our evolution of our program where even among some of our viewers, we need to be absolutely blunt with some of the nonsense that we are getting back in some of our YouTube comments. So obviously the last show we did an expose about the federal budget.
Yep.
And the show before that, we talked about how much additional gross debt Australia's 9 governments are likely to pile up over 5 financial years from July 2019 to June 2024. There was a particular YouTube comment on our last program that just drove me nuts. And I thought to myself, it is so important from an economic point of view that we just cannot let this comment slide, because unfortunately this comment we're about to show is all too common in this country, and this attitude, which is prevailing across most of Australia, is the reason why we are in decline as a country. So let's actually put this up on the screen for our audience to see. So now the person, whoever they are, they didn't reveal their real name. So we're not actually engaging in defamation per se, because we're not actually targeting an individual. But this is the quote.
And just to say, this is on the website, right, in the quote section, so people can go and check it out, right?
Yes. So now, with our last show, we published it on In the Interest of the People, and then you showed a preview on Walk the Walk.
Yep.
So this is from In the Interest of the People YouTube comments. So that's where I saw it, and this is where I took it from.
Yep.
So this is the quote. Bugger it. I have no real estate to worry about. This isn't my debt to worry about on a personal level, and my children are not going to own it either. That is one of the most ignorant political and economic comments I have seen. And unfortunately, if our audience can cast their mind, for those who have been watching us for a while, in February of last year, we interviewed Campbell Newman, the former Queensland Premier, and Campbell Newman got demolished in the 2015 election. Now, at the time, I referred to focus group testing that the Liberal National Party did after that election. Now, I didn't reveal who told me this, but I will reveal it tonight. So George Christensen, the member for Dawson, he told me, I think in 2019, in a private conversation in federal parliament, that after the 2015 election, the Liberal National Party wanted to understand why was the loss of the Newman government so large, why was it so dramatic. So they did some polling, they did some focus group testing. They got the people, Queenslanders, in a room and said, well, aren't you concerned? Because obviously they wanted to understand, why wasn't some of the benefits of the Newman government recognised? And again, I'm not an apologist for Campbell Newman or anything like that, but the question was asked, what about the Queensland budget deficit? And obviously there was a dramatic austerity package that Campbell Newman brought in. And if people want to go back and watch that interview, he said that when he walked into the premiership and he sat down with officials and saw the real state of the books, it was worse than what he thought as leader of the opposition. So he took an aggressive approach to cutting public expenditure, to put the state on a path of balancing the books, as well as trying to get the debt under some semblance of control. So after the 2015 election loss, when the Liberal Party did some polling, they brought people in and said, what about the debt? What about the deficit? Half of the respondents said, that's not my debt, that's the politicians. I didn't do that, I'm not responsible, I don't acknowledge it's my problem. That's half of them. The other half apparently said, I understand that this is a problem and that it needs to be addressed, but I don't want to pay for it. So that's where the austerity pack, the program of Campbell Newman received no public support in Queensland. And this is the type of statement that drove that election outcome. And since then, and you know, politicians may not say this publicly, but they will definitely say it privately. Because it's been said to me, if I try to do the right thing for the country, I will lose an election. So when members of federal parliament have said about the household debt bubble, how do we fix it, John? Raise interest rates, pop the bubble, shrink the debt, have actually a more responsible banking policy. And you had, a number of years ago, Professor Steve Keen on this program. Yep. And Professor Keen said that to have a sustainable economy, you need households with about a third of the debt they're carrying now. So we need to shrink the debt. So whether it's about household debt, foreign debt, or now even this public sector debt where we do require some responsible decisions being made, politicians tell me privately, John, I understand the arguments you make. As an economist, they all make sense. I just cannot win an election doing so. Now, on 2 points, the first point I've said to some of these politicians is there's only been one election in federal Australian history where a political leader went to an election with an explicit austerity campaign and they won the biggest victory in Australian history. That was Joseph Lyons in the 1931 election, and we covered that in a program last year that only the 10th Prime Minister can save Australia. So when I say to people, well, you haven't tried to actually explain to the public, because if you do try, well, when someone actually did try, they were actually successful in winning office and actually implementing a program. But in the current environment, when voters are saying this, that it's not my problem, it's not my debt, my children are not going to pay for it, politicians will just take the easy way out of racking up ever more debt in the trillions of dollars, printing the money supply to exorbitant amounts, and we're going to have this massive inflationary stagflation problem, which basically means, and I think we may have even discussed this in a previous show, in March of this year, Business Insider reported a third of Australians are in financial distress. I mean, some people have asked me, what happened to your economic Armageddon thesis? Well, Armageddon's here. When a third of the country is in distress, this is a professor from the University of Melbourne. When a third of the households are in financial distress, when 25% of households are suffering depression and anxiety because of finances, that is a horrific economy. That's not an economy where you can say the economy is strong and everyone is doing well. No, a lot of people are not doing well. And again, we need to come to terms with the full scale of what this country is going through. And attitudes like this is the antithesis of what we need at this time.
Well, let me make a couple of points there, John. The first is, of course, there is a wonderful set of alibis being used now, which is, one, interest rates are really, really low, so we can borrow a lot more. Right. Secondly, they quote the MMT gospel of truth, which means that you can borrow as much as you like for as long as you like, because the government isn't like a standard household budget, right? And then the third thing is, of course, that as we said the other day, Frydenberg's now said no. The critical issue is to get unemployment down, and we'll do whatever it takes to get unemployment down. So that basically they've got an alibi for that too. But the fundamental point is that debt is there, it's lurking, it needs to be addressed, and you're right. My data, other people's data is highlighting this massive residual issue with so many households now in Australia already, right? That, like it or not, they've actually got caught by this trap already. So it's not like we're all home and free, right? It's already biting, it's already hurting, and ahead it's going to bite and hurt even more.
Indeed. Now, I want to address the actual factual element of this is so when an Australian says the government has racked up debt, it's not my debt, I don't have to pay for it. No, the reality is, from an economic point of view, you will pay for it in one form or another. Yep. And so we're going to go through 5 specific ways in which individual voters will pay for this debt. So the first type is when a government implements austerity. So that's when they have to dramatically, when a government is under financial pressure, they dramatically have to cut spending And that's what Australia did in the Great Depression. So when we had a sovereign debt crisis, our governments were too much in debt, particularly state governments. They implemented what was called the Premier's Plan, dramatic cuts to spending. And those who rely on government spending, and in the current environment, who would that be? It is NDIS, the aged care, healthcare, education. That is the bulk of the federal budget in particular. Now, we can look at some of the state budgets as well. But if you rely on a government payment, if you rely on public healthcare, if you rely on public education, if a government down the track has to dramatically cut spending, you are going to miss out on these public services. And particularly if you are reliant on government payments, your life is going to be horrendous. And should I say, Martin, that after the austerity of Greece in 2012, when the Europeans forced the Greeks to dramatically cut spending, raise taxes, and do a whole bunch of other things, a third of Greeks fell below the poverty line. So things were not flash in Greece before austerity, but when austerity came, a third was, and so again, we have a third in financial distress, but that's not a third in under the poverty line. That is a level of economic destitution beyond what a third of households are experiencing now. Yep. So that's the first one. The second type of how people will pay for this exorbitant government debt is through hyperinflation. So if a government is under pressure of they have to continue to finance these deficits and they can't get enough people to lend money to the government, well, what does the government do? They go to their central bank, like the RBA, and they say, okay, we will need you to ramp up the printing presses and we need you to start buying all this debt up. We have some dramatic famous examples. Germany 1923, Zimbabwe 2008, Venezuela in the current environment. But and these are these are dramatic hyperinflations. Now, the economic textbook of hyperinflation, according to the Economist, the academics, is 50% inflation per month. Now, there's a whole host of less famous examples of hyperinflation, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Germany, Zimbabwe, or Venezuela. But let there be no doubt, whether it's the work of Ludwig von Mises or Milton Friedman, when you have a central bank that prints exorbitant sums of money, that is going to cause a massive inflation problem. And what does that mean for a voter like this says, well, I'm not going to pay for it? Well, you will pay for it because prices of everything in the economy will go up as the money loses value, and then your living standards will go down because your wages and your wealth will not be able to insulate you from the inflation.
And it's just giving you an example, everybody talks about high house prices. Actually, it's not really house prices going up.
It's the money going down.
It's the value of money going down, right?
Exactly.
So we've already seen what happens when that phenomenon occurs.
Absolutely. So the third type of way that an individual voter will pay for this debt is if the government goes through some sort of default. Now, default can happen through a full-on scale default, or we're going to not pay any of the debt or the interest, or we're going to go through some sort of partial default and we're going to go through a restructuring program. And that's part of what Greece had to do. Now, when you go through a restructure, what happens? The creditors force you to accept a whole host of conditions as part of the restructure. Now, if you say, I'm not going to abide by a restructure and I'm going to do a full-on default, well, what happens to an economy in that sense? Well, first off is interest rates go sky high because no one's going to, foreign creditors say, we're not going to lend you any money. So interest rates go sky high, the currency collapses as foreign creditors dump the currency. And as the currency falls through the floor, you again have another form of hyperinflation. And the example of where this happened was Argentina. Yep. So around 2001, but also not only in 2001, even in the late 80s, early 90s, yep. Argentina has had a history of defaulting on government debt. And then the peso has gone through the floor, and the ordinary Argentinian has had enormous difficulties in terms of getting through on a life-to-life basis. I mean, we have said in previous shows that Australians, particularly if you were born after 1974, you have not gone through genuine adverse economic conditions because, genuine adverse economic conditions as a working adult.
Yep.
So if you go back to the last time where unemployment was high, say 1991, and you go back in terms of 18 years, where you get into the mid 70s, and then if you're born after that, you never really had to face it as a working adult. So we have a whole generation of Australians, probably from about 45, 46 years below, who basically don't understand. They think that COVID-19 in the last 12 months has been horrific. And for some, it has been horrific. But when we talk about defaulting on debt, I mean, we have not seen anything yet as to how bad economic conditions could be in this country if we had to go through some sort of default process. So that's the third way that we potentially could pay for it. The fourth way is through the raising of taxes. And again, what is taxes? It's stealing either your income, and that could be through, for example, it could be through raising income taxes. It could be raising charges that you have to pay, or it could be that, particularly for public services, you have to, rather than getting something for free like Medicare, you actually have to pay to go see a doctor. So there could be user charges in order to raise more revenue for the government, and all of those types of taxes and charges, individual voters will have to pay for those in those situations. And so I have a couple of examples. So when the Italians were forced to go through an austerity program in 2011-12, well, they started raising service charges on the Italian healthcare system. So if you wanted to go see the doctor, or if you wanted to go to hospital to get whatever ailment that you had, you actually had to pay for it. And that is an extra cost that you will have to pay from the responsibility of politicians. Now, the other thing, and how about we just put this on the screen? Well, the Victorian government has just released their budget, and one of the centerpieces is higher property taxes and land taxes. So if you're a property owner, if you own land in Victoria, the Andrews government says, well, you now have to pay so we can get our deficit under some sort of control. And should I say, even though they're saying we want you to pay more tax, they're still running a deficit. So it's not like pay tax and we're going to balance the budget. No, we're still running red ink. And again, taxes is one way that you will pay if you do not put pressure on politicians to have responsible public finance. Now, the fifth way, and this is where we get into more some sort of more dramatic historical examples, is nationalisation or confiscation. One famous example, so I was recently in the last week in Newcastle, and I actually talked about this, and people around the table had no idea about this example. But during 1935, before World War II, when the Italians under Mussolini were desperate for money, they actually came up with an ingenious idea. They said, well, gold was valuable. We need gold. How can we get the gold from the Italian citizens? They came up with sophisticated propaganda and convinced every Italian woman in 1935 that in service of your country, it is patriotic that you hand over your gold wedding rings to the government, and the government is going to give you a steel wedding ring in replacement, and this is how you are benefiting the nation. Well, I think if the Australian government tried that today, most Australian women would not hand over their gold wedding rings. But guess what happened in 1935? Mussolini was able to collect 35 tons of gold by tricking Italian women into handing over their property. And that obviously that was more on a voluntary basis, but that was quite effective. And in recent times, we've talked about various examples of propaganda when it comes to, for example, the property sector. Well, I mean, if anyone thinks that people are more sophisticated now and they won't fall for propaganda, dare I say, that is not going to happen. Now, we have also in 1933, President Roosevelt implemented Executive Order 6102, making it illegal to own gold and to force people to hand over their gold. Now, they were paid to give the gold over. I mean, when the Nazis went across Europe, they basically stole people's gold and gave them no compensation. The American government said, no, we will pay you market value, which was at that time $20 per ounce. But they nationalized gold. Now, most people played dumb and didn't give their gold, but they collected about 22% of all privately owned gold at that time. And then when they took the gold, what did the American government under FDR do? They devalued the currency. So they said, well, an ounce of gold, rather than being worth $20, is now worth $35, which meant that if you still owned, if you actually owned paper currency, it means you could have bought less gold or less things with that money. So it was actually confiscation of wealth that FDR did under this gold nationalization program. Example 3, Venezuela under Chavez nationalized all the gold mines, and if you had shares in gold mining companies, particularly that were listed in Canada or North America, guess what? You got pennies on the dollar for your shares, and your wealth was confiscated by the Venezuelan government. And then the last example, and again, so some people may say, well, now you've talked about the Americans under Roosevelt, you've talked about fascism, you've talked about under Mussolini, you've talked about communism under Chavez or socialism. Australia's not none of those examples. So what's this got to do with me? Well, dare I say, well, we have an example from English history. So Charles I, before the English Civil War, basically was short of money. So he needed to find money, and certain proposals on taxes were not accepted by the Parliament. So he went to the Royal Mint at the Tower of London. They had £130,000, and obviously this is in the 17th century, so £130,000 at that time is exorbitant sum of money. And what did he do in the Tower of London? The king just stole all the money. And basically that's how he was able to overcome some of his short-term financial problems. So again, there is, given that we have the Westminster system, we have the Queen Elizabeth is still our queen, given that we have linkages back to the English Parliament, English law. If anyone says that if King Charles I can basically go flog £130,000, who was to say that a prime minister in Australia can't go off and steal people's money? Whether it's and should I say the first and most obvious place Parliament will steal money is superannuation. Yep. It's a 3 trillion bucket just begging to be stolen. Yep. So they did it in the last decade, where they changed the rules, they put in some caps, they raised some taxes, so they can again tighten some rules where they think they can tighten, or they can start to say, well, we're just going to take 10% of all super accounts, and that's how we're going to raise taxes. I mean, so again, if people say I'm not going to pay for it, well, if Parliament is desperate, and if these politicians are think they can get away with it, they're going to start stealing people's super. So again, I mean, these are just 5 specific ways, Martin, that if the ordinary Australian says, it's not my debt, it's not my problem, no, you will pay for it, and you need to basically wake up to what's going on. You need to apply pressure on politicians to run sound fiscal policy, so that down the track we do not have further catastrophic events, because when governments get desperate, they do things that in normal times you think are unfathomable. But I think hopefully what we have seen, particularly with this nonsense now about vaccine passports, about travelling within our own country, I think hopefully enough Australians are waking up to the fact that these politicians are out of control. They think they can get away with anything. The mainstream media has pushed propaganda on 90% of the public. Maybe 10%, maybe less of the population is awake. But even those who watch our program still think that all of this is just some sort of theoretical game, and that they're not impacted. I mean, this is real life. This is no. I mean, we're not playing games here. I mean, look, we're not playing with imaginary numbers, a billion here, a trillion there. I mean, we're talking about real stuff, and people need to wake up and actually assume responsibility, not only for their own personal circumstances, but for their country. Because if we allow Morrison and Frydenberg to run the show for the next 5 years, God knows where we're going to be.
Right. So there are a couple of observations, John. The first is clearly there are points where we should be, lobbying the current incumbents, right? like we did with the cash ban and those sorts of things. But there's also a broader question when it comes to election time, right? Because, of course, the next election has been basically set up by the last budget with lots of giveaways and lots of fuzziness, but not actually tackling the fundamental issues that we know that are there with regard to the debt. And they're incurring more than, 100 billion of interest payments over the next few years, which is an opportunity cost of doing things that could really make a difference to our economy, as we discussed the other day.
Exactly.
So there's a really important point of action here. Everybody, like it or not, you have a vote, right? Well, use that vote and make a difference.
Indeed. And can I just say, look, during the week, I did a seminar in Newcastle here in New South Wales, and one audience member sort of stood up and said, congratulations, John, you have a voice. You've done sort of things, particularly on the cash ban. And I said, you're wrong. I don't have a voice. We all have a voice. And the difference between me and you is I've taken action, but nothing prevents you from taking action. Every citizen has the power within themselves. I mean, like I think John Farnham, you are the voice. Everyone is the voice. Everyone has the power. Everyone needs to exercise that power, and we need to get on top of these issues. And we cannot just continue to be fuzzy and say it's not real. It's not my problem. I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to talk about it. No, people need to wake the F up and actually get real with what's going on.
Yep. Wake up, smell the roses, take action. It's your responsibility. It's not somebody else's responsibility.
Exactly.
John, I appreciate your time today. That's a really, really important message. And I guess we'll come back to it down the track.
Yes.
Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of people. We'll see you next time.